Hi, guys, and welcome back to Too Much. I had quite the weekend. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm a little bit foggy today because I have a 2-day hangover because I just turned 31, and that's what happens apparently when you're 31. My birthday was on Friday. I had a lovely, calm day with Mr. Wright, took me out to dinner, and it was all the calm before the storm on Saturday for the Too Much launch party. It was probably one of the better nights of my life. The turnout was amazing. It was just so unbelievable to see the logo and the podcast kind of come to life and actually be celebrated in a room by all these different people. A lot of my friends that I invited brought friends that I didn't know, but those people kind of familiarized themselves with the podcast and with me beforehand. My outfit was fucking fire. I'm so proud of it. I was actually really nervous because I thought it was really boring at first. I just wore like a bodysuit, stockings. Well, that's how it started. It was just a bodysuit and stockings. And then I threw a belt on, and then I was like, oh, a black fur coat would look really cool with this. And then I just looked fire. It was great. And I don't know, the night was awesome. I, of course, went all out on the merch. I did a big sign of the cover art. I probably had 50 or so people. It was at the Chelsea Living Room in New York, and it was just so gratifying and amazing. And I just felt the love in the room. Everyone was so excited, and it was just a really great way to kick off the podcast. So thank you, everyone who came and who supported and who was celebrating it from afar on social. It was awesome. And then yesterday was a complete rot day. Mr. Wright and I just laid around and watched movies and went to sleep by 9 p.m. And now here we are. Today was kind of the start of Fashion Week. I had an event this morning that was just a quick preview of a collection, the spring collection for this brand called Hutch. I had a meeting and then I came here. Now I'm chugging a sugar-free Red Bull because Lord knows I need the energy. So yeah, I'm just going to get right into it. I wanted to talk about this topic pretty early on in the podcast because, in the season, if you will, because it's an extremely important theme in my life, and that is hyperindependence. If you know me, if you don't know me, if you've been following along with me for the last year and a half, I said this in the first couple of episodes. I've always been a lone wolf, and there's a reason for that. And that has also transpired into this personality that I now have, which is very much rooted in hyperindependence and perfectionism. And if you don't know what hyperindependence is, it is essentially a trauma response and a coping mechanism from being continuously let down throughout your life, mainly in ways of support and help. It's essentially your brain's natural defense mechanism in response to expecting people to be there and have your back, and then they don't. And this is a scenario that happened all throughout my life. And it's not necessarily as you would expect. I think a lot of people with hyperindependence, sometimes it comes from their parents because they didn't feel that they had someone taking care of them. Others, it's in relationships in a romantic way, and they never felt supported by their partner. But for me, I think it mainly came from friendships. It started at a very young age, and it's had a lasting effect to this very day. I'm 31 years old, and I am still being triggered by things that remind me of what happened to me when I was younger. And this shows up in my career. It's very difficult for me to ask for help. I am kind of the person that's I'll just do it myself because I think if I delegate, it's not going to be done the way that I want it to. I am a perfectionist, which sometimes results in paralysis by analysis because I fixate on things. It shows up in my relationship, which is probably the most harmful place for it to show up. And it also shows up in my friendships. It's really hard for me to let people in because I'm afraid of being hurt and I'm afraid of being let down. I am a fiercely, fiercely loyal person. And I put 110% effort into my relationships. And so often I'm finding that no matter how much effort I put in, I'm still being let down by these people. So that was the thought process that started to transpire as I would experience these letdowns. And it made me develop this coping mechanism. If I never ask for help, you can never let me down. If I don't open myself up to you, then there's no way that you can reject me or make me feel unwanted, which you can imagine is very unhealthy. So throughout this episode, I'm probably going to be using, or I am going to be using a lot of psychological terms. So I just want to kind of preface what those are and be clear just in case people don't know. I have touched on this in the past in my previous podcast, and I honestly did not know any of these definitions until I started doing research on why I am the way that I am. I found out, like I said, that hyperindependence is a trauma response. And trauma responses are often associated with acute trauma. An acute trauma is a specific instance that happened. And that could be something like an assault or a car accident or something physical, just a moment in time. But there's also psychological trauma where a distressing event happens and it disrupts a person's sense of security. So essentially, your body and your mind is just trying to survive. So that is when your brain kicks into fight or flight. Also, within fight or flight, there are two other responses: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Fighting is when you have an emotional response and you are like, I'm going to defend myself so that you cannot be harmed by what harmed you in the past. So you fight. The other one is flight, where you isolate and you leave the situation. You're like, I'm getting the fuck out of here because I won't let this hurt me again. Freeze is when you kind of go into paralysis and you don't make a decision one way or the other. So it could be really debilitating. And then there's fawn, where you people please because you're afraid of being hurt or having something happen. So those are the 4 different types of trauma responses. And hyperindependence, I would consider the fight response. It's something that I'm doing and saying aggressively, I do not need your help so that you can't hurt me. So I'm actively making moves and decisions to defend myself from the pain. Now, when you think of hyperindependence, I know a lot of times it's easy to associate that with just independence. And what's the difference? Because independence is actually a positive thing, but it's almost like one of those, everything in moderation. Independence is great until that is all you know, and then you become hyperindependent. Independent means that you are taking responsibility for your own life and your own choices. You're not being reliant on others for your livelihood, but you do realize that help is there and you can ask for help when you need it. And you take comfort in knowing that you can. Independence gives people space to grow, and it's a really important part of development and, growing up, becoming an adult, because you can't rely on your caretaker all the time. So people do need to become independent. Where it becomes dangerous for the hyperindependence is you need the help, but you refuse to ask for it, even when it's very clear that it would benefit you, either emotionally, mentally, or it's a task and it's like time related, whatever it may be. You end up isolating yourself and it becomes difficult to build meaningful relationships. So someone who's hyper-independent, like I said, they have trouble asking for help. They tend to isolate themselves. They sometimes can't take compliments very well. They refuse to delegate. They won't ask for any favors. They won't rely on people. And they're just like, I could do it myself. I'm sure this sounds very familiar to either yourself or someone in your life, because it is so much more common than you think. But understanding why you are that way is so fucking important in your healing era, which is what I'm trying to be in. And it's especially important when you're trying to be in a long-term relationship or strengthen your friendships. So all that said, let's get into how the fuck I became this way. When I was younger, I touched on this in the friendship episode and in the very first episode too. I had a lot of friends and I was friends with everyone. I was outgoing. I was bopping around all these different friend groups. But my friendships never lasted very long. I never really felt like I had a group of friends, which is okay. But, when you're in high school and there's cliques and there's, the popular girls and this group and that group, whatever, it's hard not to compare yourself and feel less than because you haven't been accepted into a group. I had one best friend when I was younger. I think we were best friends from like 3rd grade to 6th grade. And then she moved away. So that was a big bummer. And then I became best friends with this other girl. And her and I were best friends throughout middle school and probably 1 or 2 years in high school, but then we kind of drifted apart. But I always had like the one best friend that I put so much effort into. And those few people were great, but like I said, when you're younger, you feel like you need the quantity. You don't really understand that it's quality over quantity. As I started to try and get more friends and try to fit into these other groups, I was exposing myself to so many people who truly just didn't care about me. And like I said before, I am a fiercely loyal person. So there were so many people that I would just take a bullet for, but they would not take one for me. It was a really vulnerable place that I was putting myself in because I was loving so hard. I was trying to be as good of a friend as possible, but these people kept leaving me. There were a few instances that definitely stuck out in my mind from when I was younger on the friend front. A lot of them happened as I got a little bit older when I was a senior. I'll never forget this one time. There was this group of girls that I was always friends with throughout high school. I don't know if you would call us popular or cool or like whatever you want to call us, but like we were, at least we thought we were cool. And as we got older, there were a lot of signs that I ignored that they were not very trustworthy. But I just kind of I didn't want to be friends with anyone else really. I thought like this was the group. I mean, it was us and then like the football guys and like we would all hang out. We'd all be at the same parties. And I felt that if I was not in that group, I just would be irrelevant. So I continued to hang out with them, even though I didn't really align with their views, the way they talked, I don't know what fucking filled their time. They were the girls that talked shit about people. And I want to say I was not like that. I know I'm not like that now, but I know that I was also a very different person when I was younger and I was trying to fit into all these different groups and it was a little difficult. I faced a lot of bullying in high school and these girls it didn't really feel like they had my back. For example, my house kept getting egged and I don't know why. I didn't know by who. And it was really fucking heartbreaking because like my dad had to get on the fucking roof and scrape it off. And it was like, what is going on? Why is this happening? I ended up tweeting, I know who's doing this. We have security cameras. An apology might make me not go to the police. It was a lie. I was just trying to get them to respond, whoever was doing it. And the girls in my friend group texted me and they were like, it was me. One of them said she was just the getaway car. One said she was in a bad mood. Another one said, I don't fucking know what she said. But the point is that these were people I thought I trusted and they let me down. They were intentionally hurting me behind my back. So that was like the ground beneath me became shaky. Towards the end of senior year, I was seeing this guy who was a year younger than me. We were like making out. It was nothing serious. But anyways, we were all sitting in the senior cafeteria during lunch and there was this kid on the other side of the cafeteria and he kept trying to like motion me over. And he was a new kid and I was kind of like, what the fuck? Like, why do you keep telling me to come over to you? And finally I went over and I was like, what do you want? He told me to go to the bathroom in 5 minutes. And I was like, you're sketchy. Why would you tell me to do that? And I didn't do it. And I went back to the cafeteria and I'm sitting with these girls that I thought I was friends with. They're all whispering. Everyone's being really, really sketchy. And when that happened in my school, it usually meant that there was like a fight that was about to happen. So I was kind of like, what's going on? Who's going to fight? They all just kept being like, nothing, nothing, nothing. And these are girls. That's just important to the story when you figure out what happened. So the bell rings. We all go to change classes. And the boy I'm seeing comes and meets me. And we're walking to the next class together. And I'm kind of like messing with my water bottle. And I was wearing this like white button down. It was thin, but it was not sheer by any means. And I was also like very busty at this point in my life. And I was wearing these little mini pink shorts and sneakers, like cute outfit, whatever. I'm flirting with this guy. We're walking down the hall. And all of a sudden, I just feel water rushing down my body. And then this kid I know sprints away and he slipped in the water. And then I also had a bottle of water and I went like this because I just reacted. And it was like out of fucking the movie Carrie. I was like, what the fuck? Like screamed at the top of my lungs. I was soaking wet. And I was in a white button down. So my whole shirt was see-through. And the entire hallway went quiet. This was like one of the busiest periods. And everyone was just looking at me. And I like ran to the fashion room because I think that's like where I put my bags that day or something. I don't know. And I was so upset. I grabbed my keys. I went home. I don't even want to give this story more energy because it was so long ago, but it was just kind of the start of this all. Basically, I went home. I was hysterically crying. I couldn't believe someone would pour like a bucket of water on me. And I later found out that all the girls knew, all the boys knew, All these people that I thought I was friends with planned this, and one kid got paid $40 to do it. So that shaky ground that I had beneath me was now gone, just completely pulled out from under me, and I never felt more alone in my life. To have people plot something against you, and I know it could have been worse. It could have been like pee. It could have been blood. Like, I know it could have been worse. But in the moment, it was really painful. So I really started to lose trust in people in high school. But there were a lot of other factors too that this played into. I mean, hyperindependence is something that you're not necessarily born with. Sometimes you can, based on epigenetics, which is a whole nother can of worms. But it is something that is because of the circumstances that are going on around you and the experiences that you're having. But in my household, it was also kind of taught verbally. My mother, she's my best friend. I love her to death, and I wouldn't trade my experiences that I had as a child being raised by her for the world. My parents were really supportive, and my hyperindependence doesn't ever come from them in the sense of not feeling supported and not feeling like I could rely on them. They were my cheerleaders my whole life. They still are. But the reason I bring up her and the lessons that we were taught was because of her experience. When she was 18, she got married. It was to an older guy. I think he was around like 27. She had a kid by 22, and she was divorcing him by 25. She took her 3-year-old daughter, and she lived in this woman's basement, and she worked 3 jobs and supported the 2 of them. It's making me emotional. I can't even imagine how hard that must have been. Also, like, going through a divorce when you're 25 years old. Like, when I think about where I was when I was 25, like, I was having trouble keeping my phone for longer than a few months. Like, to be responsible for someone else's life and be on your own like that is so, so difficult. And she also was the one that divorced him. It's not like she was left. She knew she needed to walk away. She knew she was not in something that was healthy and stable. So she made a decision that would better her life and her daughter's life. But it was at an expense. It was at the expense of her freedom because she had to work like a dog. She was still working for her ex, and it was like a nasty divorce. So I can't even imagine how hard that would have been. But all that said, she always taught us growing up, at the end of the day, all you have is yourself to rely on. You could trust people to the ends of the earth, but if they disappoint you, you have to be able to stand on your own 2 feet. And so she always taught us to never need a man. And she said, you always need to have your own money. You need to be able to walk out the door at any point in time and not worry if you're going to be okay. So that was something that I learned at a very young age. And also on the topic of epigenetics, when you experience a trauma or a traumatic life event, it actually affects women's eggs. You know, you're born with however many eggs you're going to have for the rest of your life. So I was technically in my mom's ovaries, and this trauma that she experienced is passed down to your eggs, and it affects them. It like literally shakes the DNA. So technically, I was born with this generational trauma. I don't know like how much I'm blaming my hyperindependence on that. I know there's so many other factors in my life that made me this way, but it is interesting to think about. So anyways, that was factor number 2. And then factor number 3 was honestly the relationship with my sister. I don't want to get into it too much, just out of respect for her, but people always assume that I'm the eldest daughter. I can't tell you how many times I get that. And it's very strange because I'm the youngest daughter of 3 girls. My oldest sister, she's my half sister. She's from my mom's first marriage, and she's 10 years older than me. So by the time I was 14, in my crucial developmental stages of my life, she was already out of the house. But I really looked up to her. Her and I have a great relationship, but she was more of like an authoritative figure in my life. My middle sister, she's 2.5 years older than me, and her and I have always had a really tumultuous relationship. When we were really young, it was like fighting. And then as we got older, it turned into resentment. It was really difficult for me to have that kind of a relationship growing up. It was not the sisterhood that I ever wanted. She's a great sister. Whenever I need her, she is there for me. I will say that. There's been a lot of traumatic events throughout my life, and she's always been there for me. But there were times where she wasn't there, when it may not have seemed important to her, but it was important to me. And that's kind of really all I want to get into on that. But I felt like I had to teach myself the lessons that a big sister should teach you. So anyways, that that was kind of the start of why I became hyper independent. As I got older in college, I really struggled with friendships. even more so than when I was younger, because when I was younger, I was kind of going through these traumatic events that got me to be hyper independent. But when I was in college, it's like that's when the reaction was really happening, because I had just lost all this trust from everyone around me in high school. And now I was kind of moving into this adult part of my life where I was being triggered by these things, but I didn't know what hyperindependence was. I didn't know what a trauma response was. I didn't know that I was even being triggered from things in my past. There's no understanding around what happened when I was younger and how that would have a lasting effect on me as an adult. So one of the biggest ways that the hyperindependence shows up in my life is perfectionism. I would want everything to be so fucking perfect. And not just like, party planning. I need like things to look perfect. I needed everyone to act the way that I wanted them to act. I would have a certain expectation of how someone would react to my generosity. And when they wouldn't, I would literally get mad at them. Hindsight, it's like hilarious to think about. Like I was getting mad at people because they were not acting how I wanted them to act. Like when you think about that, it's so silly because truly everyone's actions are out of your control. You can never control what someone else does. It's physically impossible to, I'm sure there's ways to do it, but there's no humane ways to control other people's reactions and actions. But that was not a concept that was in my purview when I was in college. So I sabotaged a lot of relationships and friendships. When I say relationships, I really mean all of them, the platonic ones and the romantic ones. But I sabotaged so many of them because of this hyper independence, because of the perfectionism, because I was just so angry that I felt I couldn't rely on anyone in my life. And I would get really hopeful with every new friendship that I had. And I would try so hard to earn my place in their mind to where I wouldn't be disposable or to where they wouldn't let me down. I basically came to the conclusion that if I couldn't control how they would act, I would fucking try to be the most perfect person to them in the world and almost manipulate their reaction. Try to get them to act how I wanted them to act because I assumed that's how someone would respond to this perfection. Fucking crazy. I don't even know where this was subconscious. It's not like something I plotted. It was truly just a trauma response. This was how my brain was coping with what I dealt with when I was younger. And just the 3 examples I gave you, there were so many more. I was in and out of friend groups. I had one friend just like literally stop talking to me we came back from summer vacation. I didn't talk to her for 3 weeks. And I was like, hey, where you been? And then she just never spoke to me again. And I was seeing her in the halls and she was my best friend. It happened to me so often. And look, maybe I was truly the problem. Maybe there was something that I did to all these people, but those specific ones, I never got an answer, so I don't know. So if I don't know, how can I change? How can I better myself and make sure this doesn't happen again? So it was just this confusion and this feeling of loneliness. And I think the loneliness to me was the most painful part. And that's why my brain was just like, we can't let this happen anymore. So like I said before, I didn't really understand what hyperindependence was until last year. I started to learn about a lot of other psychological aspects within relationships with partners and yourself. Probably 2 years ago, I was dating a narcissist and I learned a lot about narcissism and a lot about gaslighting and all of that. So I've done a lot of personal development over the last 2-3 years, but this still shows up in my day-to-day life. And I think the perspective that I tried to learn and try to have is how difficult it is to be friends or date someone who's a hyper independent. I mean, when you think about it, when you're in a relationship, you feel accomplished when you're able to do something for someone, especially if that's your love language. If acts of service is your love language or gift giving is your love language, it's a sense of accomplishment and fulfillment when you're able to do something for your partner or your friend. But if your partner or your friend is a hyper-independent person, you're left feeling unfulfilled because you're not able to provide for them in the way that you want to. And I'm not talking monetarily. I'm saying even bringing you lunch or helping you with a task, something like that. If that's how you express your love and your care for someone and they're not letting you because they refuse to accept help and refuse to accept favors, how are they going to feel fulfilled? So especially with Mr. Right now, that just made me sound like I was saying he's Mr. Right now. With Mr. Right, now, he's such a generous person. His love language is definitely gift giving and acts of service. I think he has all of them. I mean, he loves quality time and physical touch, all of that. But he's someone who likes to do things for people and he loves to take care of people. I see him do it with his parents. He takes care of them. He takes care of all of his family, all of his friends. He just is a caregiver. That's the kind of person he is. And I have the hardest time accepting that. And I think it's many times wedged some space between us. And luckily, he came into my life at a point where I started to understand this about myself. So I was able to communicate it to him. But it still is really difficult. I mean, last week or 2 weeks ago for 9 days, I was sick as a dog, like on my deathbed. And he just kept trying to love me. And I was rejecting it. I was like, please leave me alone. Get away from me. I don't want help. I don't like, he was even asking me if I was feeling okay. And I was like, please stop asking me if I'm feeling okay. And it was funny. He asked me, how did your mom take care of you when you were younger and you were sick? And I was like, she said, bye, I'll see you when I'm home from work. Like, and my mom is a very loving person. Like I said, I have an amazing relationship with her, but she was a hyper independent and she raised a hyper independent. I was never coddled as a kid when I was sick. I was just kind of told to power through. And that's how I am with everything in my life. I just power through. So I have a hard time asking for help, but I do recognize that Mr. Right needs to feel like he's helping me in order to feel fulfilled in the relationship. So I've started to do little things here and there where I'm like, it's almost like I cherry pick tasks and favors where I'm like, I could ask him to do this. Even if it's like reaching for something on the top shelf. I'm like, can you get this for me? But I know in my mind, I'm like, there's a step stool in the closet and I could just go grab it and I could just get this myself. But I'm trying to find ways where I can let him in and ask him for help. I am trying to find that balance of letting him in, asking for help when I could use it because I want this to last. But I've had to be very open with him about my triggers and what affects me. I mean, the other day, by the way, if you're new with me, when I say the other day, that could be anywhere from a day to 2 years. I'm very bad at that. So this is specifically in October. We were actually up at a college visiting one of my family members and we were with my whole family. And we started drinking at 8 a.m. because it was like a tailgate. We were there for a football game and we got really drunk. Long story short, I got into it with my family and it was kind of about something that was going on with Mr. Right and I. And I felt that he could have stepped up and said something. Hindsight, I can only imagine how hard that would have been for him to like say something to my family, get in their face or something. So I do understand, but in the moment I was drunk, which is not an excuse, but I'm just painting the picture. But I was so triggered that he did not have my back. And I felt so alone. And I had a mental fucking breakdown in the middle of the street, hysterically crying, just being like, I'm alone. I'm alone. I got it. Emma's good. She doesn't need anyone. She doesn't need any help. You can just like go. And it was dark. It was really fucking dark. And I had to have like a very serious conversation with him the next day to explain really what hyperindependence is and where these triggers come from and how I have just felt so let down from so many people in my life. And I had to explain to him my triggers. I had to communicate those. I think it's really important for people not to use their triggers as an excuse. I'm not telling him this triggers me, so you just gotta let it go. Every time this happens, like that's just a trigger of mine and I'm gonna act the way that I'm gonna act. I don't feel that that's acceptable. Communicating your triggers to someone is not meant to excuse bad behavior. I think in a relationship and in a friendship, you need to give people the tools they need to understand your reactions to certain situations and scenarios. It is still your responsibility to work through these trauma responses to the best of your ability to grow from the pain and heal yourself. And the triggers will become less and less and less. I love being an independent person. I don't want this whole spiel to come across as independence is bad. Independence is amazing. And I think being able to bet on yourself and work your ass off, even if it's by yourself, is so important. But understanding that your actions might be rooted in hyperindependence and identifying how they're affecting the relationships and friendships and environments in your life is so important because we all need someone. We all need people. We need to let them in. I've said this in the past few episodes that it's important to connect with people and get vulnerable and share with them. Something that I came to realize recently is the definition of what makes you vulnerable. And a lot of people think that vulnerability just means sharing stories, letting people in and talking about your past. Vulnerability is very subjective. What makes me vulnerable is feeling like I'm relying on someone. So when I say I'm getting vulnerable with someone, that's me looking to them for support and letting them be a pillar of support in my life, trusting that it won't crumble beneath me. That's what vulnerability is to me. And it's important to identify what it is for yourself so that you can get vulnerable with people and build these more meaningful relationships and not have them all be so surface level. Because I think that's what a lot of the friendships in my 20s were. It's like it was very broad, but not very deep. So yeah, it's a process, but it's something that I try to balance. I am proud of my independence. I am working on my hyper independence. And yeah, that's me scratching the surface on that today. I will definitely do more episodes getting into perfectionism, just all the other ways that your triggers could result in trauma responses and, how that just affects your life. But I just thought this was a really important episode for me to do to let you guys understand who I am and why I act the way that I do. Yeah, that's it. Thanks so much for tuning in. Please, my shameless plug every week, like and subscribe on Spotify. Please give me 5 stars if you enjoyed the episode today, of course. If not, whatever, rate this whatever you want, but 5 stars would be sick. And give me a follow, Emma's Too Much on Instagram and TikTok. Love you all. Thank you so much, and never lose your muchness. Bye.